Tax planning and tax preparation are two entirely different things. But what happens when you're filing your taxes and it's no longer a joint return? Something has happened, possibly a divorce, but it's usually the loss of a long-term relationship. What is margin compression? What does it mean to your retirement? What has changed from 401ks where pensions used to be? These are things that you need to know before you have the loss of a loved one. Join us on Consider This program today. We'll give you the answers. Well, good morning and welcome back to Consider This program. I'm your host, Joe Clark.
And I'm Jamie Burton.
And we are happy to have you along, Jamie. It is always enjoyable when you're on the show. And thank you all for taking the time. You should be proud of yourselves for taking the time to try to learn more about your money. Now, Jamie and I are fiduciaries. That means we have to treat your money as if it were our money and we were in the same situation. So we're going to give you things today to help you think about the way we think about money. And hopefully that will be of help for you. Jamie has a unique perspective. She's a woman. I'm not, right? And what we do know is, like it or not, men tend to die first. 70% of the time in a long-term relationship, it is the female that is left behind. And there's a lot of things that are confusing and complex. So let's go ahead and start to break this down, Jamie. The theme of this segment, of this part of the show, is what happens when you're no longer filing a joint return. Mm-hmm. So what is a joint return? What's that mean?
So a joint return means that you have two people that are on the same tax return. So you have different tax brackets than if you were to file single. So not different tax brackets, it's still the same brackets, but they're compressed when you're filing single. So you have larger segments where you can earn money and pay in a preferential tax rate.
There you go. So the way I taught it to you at Purdue and the way that I was explaining it's a stair-step system, mm-hmm. right? As you make more money, you move up to a higher step. It doesn't mean that you don't pay money at that lower level. You just go to a higher step. Mm-hmm. And what happens when somebody passes away is the step shrinks.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. Suddenly they're at a higher level without their husband, if we're following along in the suit of the show, or their wife. It does happen both ways. And we are... I guess blessed and honored and still saddened to have buried a lot of those spouses over those years. So what is the difference between today, where we are now, versus when people had pensions? What mm-hmm. really goes on there?
Yeah, so before people, they had pensions with their jobs. So they knew that once they retired, they were going to have this guaranteed income stream, either for their life or if they chose to take a payment where it would continue on through their spouse's life as well. So along with the Social Security, they'd have this pension income coming in. Well, things have changed in the workforce to where pensions aren't really offered anymore. So people have to start saving money into their 401ks in order to have extra income outside of Social Security once they get to retirement.
So when you think about it, if and when you talk about pensions like that, and you really weren't around when people had them, you know, to the most part, usually you had to take a pretty substantial haircut to be able to cover your spouse, mm-hmm. right? Could be 10, 15, 20%. If you're going to give your spouse a full portion. So a lot of people didn't do it at all. But the problem is when you look at this margin expansion or compression, and I always have used the word compression. Somebody told me a few weeks ago that, Joe, it's really margin expansion. It's kind of like, yeah, whatever. The bottom line is the steps got smaller and you got to a higher rate quicker. Mm-hmm. So whatever you need to call that to be able to internalize it is really what it is you need to know. The challenge was, though, if I've got $1 million in my 401k and I die, Barb still has the $1 million. It didn't go away just because I died. Right. And suddenly the stair steps got smaller. Mm-hmm. Right. And when she reaches 72, she still has to take required minimum distributions, even if she doesn't need the money. Mm-hmm. Right.
Right.
And now we've got that margin compression. She's on a shorter stair. Right. And all of a sudden we're giving more money to the IRS just because I decided to die.
Right.
Right. Not a good plan.
Right.
So what are some strategies? What are things that people should be considering to get around this?
Yeah. So, first of all, when you're in the accumulation phase, it's so important to look at what you're saving and what you're saving into. So, you want to make sure that you have tax diversification when you are saving these dollars.
What's that mean?
So, that means that you have, think of it as 3 buckets. So 3 buckets of money that you want to start saving into. One is tax deferred. That means that you're not paying any taxes on the money that you put in today. It grows tax deferred, and when you take it out in retirement, 100% of that bucket of money you have to pay taxes on at whatever tax rate it is when you take it out. The next bucket of money you can think of as tax-free. So that's your Roth money. You pay taxes on the money that goes in today. It grows tax-deferred, and then when you take it out in retirement, you owe taxes on none of the money. The third one is taxable money. So this would be a brokerage account or maybe a savings account. So you pay taxes on the money that goes in today, and then you get a 1099 each year for the growth in that account. So those are the 3 buckets of money that you really want to save into when you're in the accumulation phase, so you have a lot more room and freedom of where you're going to draw money from in the future when you are needing that money.
And ideally, it's a third, a third, and a third, right? I mean, the best money that you're ever going to have is Roth money because the taxes have already been paid. But the challenge is all tax policy is social policy, right? I mean, if you're listening to the show when we're doing it, it's the middle of August of 2021, and what you're going to hear is an infrastructure bill that's being passed, debt ceiling requirements that are coming up. You're going to hear all of this stuff that's going on. The IRS is fluid, if they're anything. I mean, they're always changing the rules in terms of where they are. And so what Jamie is trying to tell you, whether you're a woman or a man, this is immaterial. What we're trying to tell you is you want choices. You want options. As I look at my 34 years in the financial services industry, the difference between successful retirements and failed retirements really can be the tax return. It's what tax rate are you paying it at? And knowing that we don't know where the IRS is headed into the future, but knowing where you want to go into the future, we can put together a plan by using that tax diversification right from the very, very beginning to put you in the best spot. Now, Jamie, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so that's the accumulation phase. That's if you start planning correctly in the accumulation phase. What happens if you are past the accumulation phase? You've already saved the majority of what you are going to save to live off in retirement, and you look and you think, wow, I didn't have the Roth option when I first started saving. I didn't start putting money into those 3 buckets of money, and now here I am with all tax-deferred money. What can I do now? And there are options once you get to that point. So that's when we would start having conversations about doing things like Roth conversions. So with Roth conversions, that means that you take money out of that tax-deferred bucket, you pay taxes on the money today at whatever tax bracket you're in, and you convert that to the Roth IRA. So then that starts growing tax-free for you. So it's pretty complex tax planning. You have to go year by year to figure out what tax bracket you're going to be in each year and how much room you have to play with and that sort of thing. But that's where we would start planning if you are past that accumulation phase and need to start tax diversifying then.
We call that preservation as the stage, but pay attention to what she just said. We had somebody 4 or 5 years ago who heard this radio show and went out and converted $1 million in 1 year because they liked the idea of a Roth conversion. That is not in any way what we're advocating. What we're trying to do is make sure you're maximizing those current tax brackets today so that you don't get caught in a pickle just because your spouse passed away later on down the line. So what happens when we get into distribution?
So when we get into distribution and you have this tax-deferred money, you have what's called a required minimum distribution. So at age 72, you have to start taking out a percentage of whatever is tax-deferred dollars, whether you need it or not, and you're going to have to pay taxes in whatever bracket you're in at that point. There's really only one way that you can keep that money from hitting your tax return, and that's doing what's called a qualified charitable distribution. And that's when you take money that is in your tax deferred account, you send it directly to a 501c3 charity as a gift to them. They sell it. They don't pay taxes on it, and it doesn't hit your tax return as income, so you don't pay taxes on it either. So that's one of the strategies that we play with when we're in the distribution stage and have to start taking money out.
So key takeaways, guys. Here's what I need you to understand. There is a difference between income and assets. You saved your entire lives No, if you started in 1980, the last 41 years, right? If you started your career in 1980 and started saving money likely into a 401k or an IRA, you did it the majority of the time. The only thing you had the ability to do is put it into a tax-deferred asset. So you probably don't have the tax diversification that Jamie and I just spoke about. We can still build it. We can still work on that, if you will. But you need to understand your entire focus has been on building assets. Now it's about getting income when you go into that distribution. How do I get it out? And what is it going to mean for my spouse, whether she needs or he needs the money or not? With required minimum distributions, what really happens there? We have a checklist, 5 things surviving spouses need to know. You can go to yourlifeafterwork.com, just go to our resource page and ask for that checklist. More than happy to share it with you. If you know somebody who's lost a spouse or you just want to be prepared, it's one of those important things. I've written articles in the past about this conversation. It's important. It matters a lot to me because it's part of that financial journey. One of us is going to die first, but both of us will eventually die. We want to make sure that each of you are protected as well as your spouses are protected. And Jamie actually just co-authored an article for me this week on Suddenly Single. That'll be hitting the Anderson Herald this Saturday or Sunday, I guess, whichever day the paper comes out anymore. But you can always get it on our website. You can go to considerthisprogram.com, find all of our radio shows, all of our radio segments, all the videos that go along with this. If you're listening on a podcast or radio, you may not see that. If you go onto the website, you will find it, or yourlifeafterwork.com. While you're there, get signed up for a Next Steps meeting, 800-928-4001.